Chapter 6. Learning the System's Language. By this point, I had started to understand something that changed the entire fight. The truth was not going to be enough by itself. Not because it was weak, not because it was unclear, not because my life was not already showing the consequences, but because the system did not read suffering the way a human being does. It read categories, it read codes, it read labels, it read what fit cleanly on paper. And I was starting to understand that if I wanted the truth of my life to survive that process, I was going to have to learn how to speak in a language I never should have needed. That was the shift. Up to that point, I had still been hopping that honesty, records, and medical support would carry enough weight on their own. And they should have. That is the part that still gets me. They should have. But should is not the same as did. So I started learning. Not because I wanted to become some expert in appeals, prior authorizations, coding problems, grievance language, or insurance terminology. Not because I had extra time. Not because I felt well enough to take on one more thing. I learned because I could feel what would happen if I didn't. I could feel the case being in danger of becoming smaller than the life I was actually living. That is what pushed me. I started learning the difference between what I meant and what they needed to hear. I started learning that I am struggling to eat had to become nutritional compromise. That I cannot chew the way I need to had to become functional oral impairment. That this is affecting my medications had to become impaired medication administration. That this is making me sicker had to become systemic risk. That this is not optional had to become medically necessary. That is such a strange thing to live through. To already be suffering in plain human terms, and then realize you have to convert your life into colder language before the system will even begin to hold it correctly. It felt unfair. It felt insulting. It felt like my reality had to audition. And I hated that. But I learned it anyway, because by then I was starting to understand something else too. If I did not learn how to say it in their language, someone else would say it for me, and they might say it smaller. They might say it flatter. They might say it in a way that made the whole thing easier to misroute, misunderstand, or dismiss. I could not let that happen. Not when my body was already paying for every delay. Not when eating was already hard. Not when medication already depended on whether I could get enough food in. Not when the people responsible for my care could already see this was serious. So I learned. I learned what words carried weight. I learned what phrases opened doors and which ones got ignored. I learned that one version of the truth might sound compelling to a normal person, while another version of that exact same truth was the one that could survive review. I learned that the system does not reward the most honest story. It rewards the best supported one, the best structured one. The one that can be slotted into its framework, without making the reviewer work too hard to understand the human being inside it. That is a brutal lesson, especially when you are already the human being inside it. There is something deeply exhausting about having to become fluent in the language of your own suffering, to study how to say what pain means, how to say what hunger means, how to say what instability means, how to say what delay means, how to say all of it in a way that cannot be casually waved off. But that is what I started doing. I was reading, comparing, listening carefully, paying attention to the words that came back from insurance, paying attention to what they repeated, paying attention to what they flattened, paying attention to where truth got lost. I was not doing that from a place of comfort. I was doing it from necessity, from fear, from urgency, from the growing understanding that no one was going to come rescue the meaning of this for me if I did not protect it myself. That changes a person. You stop speaking casually. You stop assuming people mean the same thing you mean. You start hearing the difference between a complaint and an appeal, between dental and medical, between documentation received and documentation actually considered, between a case being opened and a case being handled correctly. You start hearing danger inside words that used to sound harmless. That was happening to me. I was still a patient, still sick, still trying to function, but I was also becoming something else, a translator, an organizer, A person learning how to stand at the edge of a system and force it to hear the truth in terms it could not pretend not to understand. And I want people to understand this part. Learning that language did not make me less human. It did not mean I was becoming cold. It meant I was fighting to keep something deeply human from being erased by process. That is why I learned it. Not to play games, not to sound smart, not to perform competence, but because my life was already being affected in real ways, and I could see that if I stayed only in plain language, I was at risk of being heard as a person and ignored as a case. And in systems like this, being heard as a person is not always enough to save you. So I learned the language. I learned it while tired. I learned it while scared. I learned it while still trying to eat, still trying to manage pain, still trying not to fall apart. And I learned it because by then I understood something I could not unlearn. The truth was real. But if I wanted it to count, I was going to have to fight for the right words too.